Just minutes ago, I finished Last of Us 2, and I'm still a little bit in shock. I got a lot to say here in this review, so I hope you'll bear with me. I'm going to look at all of the good, and then I'll talk about all of the bad. But if you just want a recommendation, spoiler free, the rest of this is going to be spoilers. So my recommendation is, I think maybe at some point you should experience this game, but be warned, it's not a fun experience. Do not go into this video game expecting fun, which is why I think most of us play video games. So let's talk about it. So the game is currently setting at a 95 on Metacritic with a 4.4 user score. But let's talk about that 95 Metacritic score because I can tell you why this game has that score. If you can be entirely objective as you're playing through this game and you look at the graphics, these graphics are like nothing else this generation. The game is gorgeous. The animation in this game, absolutely top notch. So why did I not enjoy the game? But first off, I want to start off by saying I was definitely wrong about something going into this game. In a previous video after the leaks, I said that I was very afraid they were going to be very ham-fisted when it comes to modern-day political issues about LGBTQ+ and diversity and that kind of thing. And here's the thing, I was absolutely wrong. Naughty Dog did tackle those topics and tackled them in really amazing ways. And I should have trusted Naughty Dog to do that. Two of my favorite characters in the game, Lev and Yara, have a plot line about them that is exactly one of these issues. And it's written so well, it's actually my favorite subplot of the game. And I think when you play through it, you'll probably agree. They are incredibly amazing characters. And we're talking about what the game does right. The gameplay this time through is so much better. I mean, it's nowhere near as fun as, say, Uncharted 4, but when it comes to the gameplay from Last of Us 2, it takes the formula and it improves on it, and I actually enjoyed the combat this time around. If you remember, I said Last of Us 2, the gameplay was the worst part about that game. This time through, it's actually the best part of the game. I loved the diversity of weapons. I loved the animations. I loved all of the gore and the viscera that comes from these different types of kills. The fact that when you kill somebody, sometimes another NPC will scream out their name, made it feel very realistic and very brutal. And I would love to see more games set in this game world, maybe just not this one. And as much as I'll play a Naughty Dog game because I enjoy the combat, because I enjoy the gameplay, because I enjoy the world that they have built, what ultimately sells me on a Naughty Dog game is the story. That's what made Last of Us 1 so good, even though the combat itself was subpar. And the story here, for me, just falls short. The appeal of the first game for me has to do with the relationship between Ellie and Joel and how they explored the world together as one cohesive pair. And of course, the decision that Joel makes at the end of the first game. And obviously, huge spoiler here, so if you're still watching this, know that I'm ruining the game for you. But when Joel gets killed off very early in the second game, it becomes abundantly clear that that's not what this game is about. And even though the story that I so desperately wanted to hear, the resolution of Joel's decision at the end of the first game, it's told by flashbacks. That's not how I wanted to experience that story. I wanted to experience that story as both Joel and Ellie working it out, figuring it out. That's the game I wanted, and it's absolutely not the game I got. But they decided not to give us that game. Instead, they gave us something very different. They decided to subvert expectations. But here's the thing, they're the ones who built my expectations. If you go back and look at all of the marketing, you will see that it very much looks like a story between Joel and Ellie. And boy, were you surprised a few hours into the game if you bought it expecting that. So since this is a sequel, again, we can point out in Last of Us 1, it was a dark and bleak world filled with moments of light. I believe the entire theme of that game was when you are stuck in the darkness, look for the light. And there was so much light in that game. I think probably the giraffe scene is the one that exemplifies it more than anything else. The reason people love that game is because in a very, very dark world, Joel and Ellie discovered the light, not just around them, but discovered it in themselves as well. And I think that's what this game is lacking. This game has no light. It just gets darker and darker and darker. And playing through this game, I think there's only one way to describe it. It is a grueling experience. The supporting cast in the previous game was definitely memorable. I mean, sometimes they were just downright awful, and it was a pleasure to dispatch them. Sometimes they were genuinely good and funny characters. There was just so much about that game that you will remember after playing it. I really don't think that's the case with this one. The supporting cast in this game fails at doing what it needs to do. There are some exceptions to the rule. There are some pretty powerful characters in this game. I ended up liking Dina a lot more than I expected. They didn't really spend a lot of time developing the character, and that's kind of frustrating. But Lev and Yara, again, I will go back to those two characters. I wish there were more characters like that. There was even some levity when you were experiencing the world with Lev, and I missed that in this game. I wish there had been more of it. The rest of the supporting cast in this game is largely just blank characters. I mean, there's some blips on the radar like Owen that I got some feelings for, some experiences for, but a lot has to do with the structure of the game. There's too many characters, you go away from them too quickly. By the time you come back to them, you spent like 10 hours away from them. I'm not sure how it's supposed to feel anything other than for the two main characters, which would be Ellie and Abby. Ellie, unfortunately, is no longer the character that I remember. The events at the end of the first game and her discovery of what really happened has hardened her. She is more cynical, and the hope and the light that's inside her seems all but extinguished. And when Joel passes, that cements that. That is the person that she is for the rest of the game. And she makes some truly awful, truly horrific choices. Choices that are so unbelievable out of character that it just kind of destroys your suspension of disbelief. For the player's perspective, these choices don't make sense, but from Ellie's perspective, a lot of these choices just don't make sense. Then you play the second half of the game as Abby, and this was an opportunity that Neil Druckmann took to try to get you to empathize with the man who killed the main character from the last game, or at least half of the main characters from the last game. And unfortunately, I feel like they utterly failed to do that. And keep that in mind. Who's talking here? I can empathize with the worst people on the planet, and I had to really work to empathize with Abby here. And even though Abby's section of the game has a little bit more of what I like in these types of games, a little more world building, a little more levity and color, a little bit more interesting storyline, I have to say that because of the structure of the game, the fact that it interrupts the story that you were telling with Ellie and takes you on what feels like a 10-hour diversion, it's just not as enjoyable. I almost wonder if we should have started the game playing as Abby. It seems like they even programmed the game to that potentially you would. And that brings me to one of the biggest issues I have with the game, besides the story being kind of lackluster, besides the levity missing. The structure for the game is bizarre because you have the main story with Ellie, but then at the same time you're experiencing the flashbacks of things that happened to Ellie previous to that, and now you're playing as Abby, but then as you're playing as Abby, you're experiencing Abby's flashbacks as well, and then you've got the two stories happening simultaneously, all leading to a confrontational end. And the structure is just so weird and bizarre, and unfortunately it's hard to keep track of it all in a 25-hour playthrough. Even if you sat down and play 5 to 8 hours a day every day, some people won't be able to do that, and it's going to be tough for them to keep track. And by the time we got to the final confrontations, and yes, there's a few, we all had already learned the lesson that revenge is wrong, and I'm screaming it at the game, and I don't want any of the characters to be making any of the decisions they're making. And ultimately, they learned that lesson as well at the very end of the game, kind of undoing every bad decision they'd made up to that point, except all of those people are gone, all of those people are dead, and I just wasted 25 hours. Oops. Finally, I want to give this video game as much credit as I can, and just the same way I started this video, I plan to end it. I did not enjoy this video game. It is not the sequel that I wanted, but objectively, is it a well-crafted, well-made video game? Yes, just not in the story department, but everything else is really, really incredible, and you can tell people poured their heart into this game. hoping to create exactly that. I think it is fair to compare it to the Disney sequels for Star Wars. They're well crafted, they're well written, they're well acted, they are well directed. That's just not the movies I wanted, and this is just not the game I wanted. I don't know what to do with that. It's still a hell of an experience, and you still might want to play it. Just know going into it, it's definitely not the game you were expecting when you finished the first one. Now, that's one man's opinion. I could be wrong, and I know if I am, you're going to let me know down there in the comments section below. While you're down there, drop a like on this video. If you want to see more videos like this, encourage me to make them by hitting that notification bell if you're already subscribed. And if you're not subscribed, what are you doing? Hit that subscription button. I think you'll be glad you did.